All right, thank you. Yeah, so I was going to have a little bit of a chat about my history, and I've talked about it a fair bit in my time, but doing these sorts of presentations. But I've gone about it a slightly different way this time, which I thought might be. There's a few little anecdotes in here that sort of hopefully relate to the bitting side of things, and a few trips that I've done, and obviously we'll talk about some of my processes in getting the bridle, getting your horses bridled and then bitted, and yeah, just some tips hopefully out of that. So that's what we'll chat about. I suppose most of you will know I come from Australia originally. I was on a farm of about 4,000 acres, which is not that big by Australian standards, but we're in a reasonably high rainfall area in the mountains actually, and I sort of learned to ride mustering sheep and cattle up and down the farm, up and down the mountains. I mean, when I go back there now, I sort of start to realize I must be mad because it's not only better weather out there, as I'm sure you're all aware, but it's really beautiful. It's up and down, and you can see for well, it seems like hundreds of miles out across the mountains and things like that. So I was quite fortunate with my upbringing, and I rode everything from naughty little ponies that used to open the back gate and come in and help himself to mum's garden to at that age too, I'd be cowboys and Indians I don't know whether you can say or do that anymore, but we'd be cowboys and Indians up in the backyard and jumping off our horses and playing dead and all this sort of thing. So, usual kid stuff, I suppose. And then I started to take a bit of interest in the sport that I've played all my life now, which is polo cross. And I think that sport I played from a really young age, so 8, I think, is when I first started playing, all the way up to well, till now. But I think when I was about a teenager, I started to realize horses are really, really important, and understanding horses is really key to being able to progress in your sport. But also, I just found it fascinating. I just wanted to understand how it worked. And I remember getting some words of wisdom from my grandfather and father along the way. I never forget. And this is really, it stuck with me for a lot of times. And it's same for bits as it is for the training you do, as the horses you have. My pa said, well, I think I was being a bit frustrated trying to work something out or doing something with a horse, and he said, he just really calmly, he was smoking, he was watching me, and he said, Jace, the perfect horse has never been made, mate. Here, come and have a drink of tea, and we'll have a look at it again in a minute. And I just never forget that. It was just one of those little things that just in passing was nothing, but it really stuck with me, and it has done all my life. Whenever I'm getting a little bit frustrated or unsure about, anything to do with horses, they're not perfect. They're all very, very different. And take a breather, have a bit of a look, and make a bit of a plan. And of course, we're talking bits tonight, and it's exactly the same for that. Sometimes you just got to step back, take a look, and make a few adjustments if you think that's what's required. So polocrosse was my main thing. For those of you that don't know what that is, it's like lacrosse and polo, that sort of combination. So it's a sort of a team sport. It's quite high adrenaline, quite fast, and that's sort of the world I was brought up in. Chasing cattle around. We used to do camp drafting in Australia, which is a sport where you push cattle around. It's basically showing skills of handling cattle on horses. So that was great fun. I did a bit of that. I also did rodeo. So I didn't do very much of that, but I did enough to get stood on my head a few times and realise there must be a better way to do things. Anyway, and my sport was polocrosse, so I did that. I also went to pony club. I did that for quite a few years. My favourites, obviously the more adrenalized sports. We used to do flag race, bending race, the sort of mounted gamesy type things. And I did do a few showing classes at Pony Club, and I wasn't great at it. I never got it. It's taken me years to really get it. And even coming over here into doing what I do, it was always for me a I like starting horses because of the process, because I can really see improvement, and it obviously helping people and seeing the horses improve. And there's a little bit of an adrenaline rush in that too when you're getting on the horse for the first time. You hope you've done all your preparation right, and to get them off the mark without too much bother, which I've got pretty good at that over the years. But anyway, going back to the Pony Club days, yeah, and in the show ring, I thought well, my dad said, you better go and get some lessons. You need to be a bit better at this. So I went to a friend of his who in my first lesson, and I didn't do many after this, but in my first lesson, she went and got this really gnarly stick out of a tree. It was sort of half dead, and she just put it down the back of my shirt. Whoop, up straight I came, and she said, "That's better. Now you're right." And again, it did stick with me, and I have always thought of that stick down my back and my positioning on the horse and sitting up a bit straighter. So all these little things, they do stick with you over the years. Yeah. So and I have to say, when I was growing up, we were farmers, that sort of thing. Basically, the horses had a job to do. We grabbed the nearest bridle and bit, and they got that thrown on them, and away they went. There was no real consideration with the bit. My dad did always say it's not what's in the horse's mouth, it's what's on the end of the reins that really matters. So you've got to think about what you're doing. So that again. So I always so that it worked for me, that, because I was really interested in the training. And of course, for the training, it was all about the psychology, the philosophies, and of training horses that I was really interested in. But there was a time Dad had this mare called Claire, odd name, but basically he named it after the lady he got it from, which is very Australian. Her name was obviously Claire. Anyway, she was a really great mare, and she was going quite well in our sport of polocross. But she started throwing ahead really badly, playing the game. So she'd be, when every action the bit, she would throw ahead and do all this sort of thing. And I thought, I was playing her at the time. I thought, Dad, what? She's just going really badly. I don't know what's going on. Anyway, he said, oh, well, we'll go and get her looked at. There's a dentist over there who might be able to have a look at her. And he was a good dentist as well. Because Dad was always pretty good with dentists, but I think, and that's another story. You want people that are experts in their field doing it anyway. There happened to be a really good dentist there, did her teeth, and I kid you not, I got on this mare and she rode just like she used to, like straight, stopped throwing ahead almost instantly. And I just thought, well, that's amazing. That was nothing to do with me. That was all to do with the mouth, the horse's mouth. And obviously there must have been sharp edges. I didn't know what was going on. There could have been wolf teeth. Well, there wasn't wolf teeth because I wouldn't have been riding her straight then and there. But she must have had some really sharp edges, or something was really uncomfortable. And just making her comfortable in the mouth changed this mare instantly. It was like, and that got me to thinking, well, you've got to get your horse's teeth done. So important. And we go as far when we're competing now to get little bit seats in to make it as comfortable as we can for the horses. But it's not a far stretch to start thinking about the bits you put in. And that was when I first started sort of taking a bit more of an interest in what went in a horse's mouth after that sort of that happened. So, and I have to say, on bits and things like that. I've been around. I went over to. I was I don't know, it must have been 22 or 3. I'd been training for a little while, but didn't know much, and I wanted to learn more. So some of you might have heard of a guy called Ray Hunt. Well, he just passed away, so that probably gives you a dates it a little bit. And they did a big memorial horsemanship event for him, and I went over there traveling. I learned some amazing stuff watching some of them work with the horses, but I also went round to some of the tack shops over in America. Oh my goodness. I have never seen anything. There's things in there that belong nowhere else but in a hardware shop or in a lumberjack's yard. I saw, yeah, all sorts of things. And I thought, well, and again, it just got me to thinking about bits and what people put in a horse's mouth. And again, you have to understand how to operate a bit and the psychology of it, but you cannot expect a horse to behave in an appropriate manner with a sort of I think the worst one I saw was as like a chain, those chainsaw, well, it didn't have the edges on it, but it was just like chain. And it was like, I mean, who would do that? But anyway, it was just a real eye opener, I have to say.
Have you looked
And
around the Have you looked around the stands at Hickston many moons ago? Because some of them they still have, or not so much now, but I can remember going around doing a similar thing and seeing bike chain and
yes, that's what
thinking,
it was, bike
yeah,
chain. That's
yeah,
exactly what it was. And I was like, what are you thinking? You're just going to ruin a horse's mouth with that. Anyway, by the by, I just gone off in a little tangent, but it just, I'm just sort of giving you a bit of an idea of how I sort of learned to think a bit more about bits because obviously other people had, but yeah, and in all sorts of different ways. Um, I think for back in the day, I was brought up with basically single joint, egg butts, loose rings, fulmars, all that sort of thing. But I was never really sort of introduced to, I mean, there's all sorts now, but we were just quite simple. And the horses mostly went fine in what we used. Um, I suppose, I suppose I started to think a little bit more about um, how bits affect horses. I had a really good mare called Breeze, who I played polocrosse on. She was great, but when I was training her to play, she was very fierce. Which is what I loved about her. She wanted to go, and for the top end of my sport, you need horses like that. And I just had a thin snaffle in her mouth, single jointed, and I was riding her, but I just felt she was she she wasn't going so good. So I changed, and for those of you that you might know Bombers, there's a brand. Well, Bomber started his business. I mean, he's worldwide now. He's got a big bidding company, but he started his business in polocrosse. He's actually comes from our sport, and I've known Bomber for a lot of years, and and when I was playing her, I thought, oh gosh, she gets a bit strong and she feels like she gets a bit worried by the bit. And so I thought I'd go two ways with it. So I tried her in a slightly stronger bit. So Bomber has a Williams cheek piece or bit rings that offer a bit of a gag action and and then I had a sort of a double jointed piece in the middle, which he said was relatively strong. And I thought, okay, well, let's just try that and see if she stays off it and becomes a little softer. So I started fiddling. This is the first time I'd really started fiddling with bits because especially in competition, because I loved this horse and I just wanted her to be the best she could be. So I thought, oh, maybe I can get another 10% out of her, in terms of performance. And tried her in this bit, and she was quite soft for for about half a chukker, and then she felt worse. She wasn't maneuvering as well. She was a bit more fierce. And then I started to think about it, and I thought, you know what? This mare is running away from that pressure, and her default is to run into it. Some horses will come right back off it, but some will, if that's their default, when they get worried, they'll grab it or they'll run into it, just trying to avoid it. And it can be, for most horses, it can come across as just a small resistance, which training and getting your horse to understand the bit is, will help. But for this mare, I was just thinking, crikey's okay. So I swapped and I went to Bomber Blue Happy Mouth. Straight bar, no tongue pressure, and that is what I play her in now. And she's still a little bit strong. She wants to go, but she's just happier and she maneuvers much better. She's quieter in the mouth. And I thought, well, there you go. Everybody talks about bitting up, but sometimes you got to bit down. I thought that was a good example. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with bitting up because, again, sometimes, I find if you get horses that lean on bits and that sort of thing, then you end up using more muscle and you end up sort of really hauling and pulling on your horse. And that's not very good. You sort of bit up a little bit, suddenly you can be lighter. But you have to remember what you put in your horse's mouth and to be lighter, because some people bit up and then they stay the same in their hands. And obviously horses won't tolerate that, for very long before they go back to leaning on that bit. And then you get in this vicious cycle of, fiddling with bits and bitting up. But yeah, you can definitely go both ways, is what I worked out from this mare. So yeah, and I suppose these days for me, doing what I'm doing, and it's really funny. Over the years, I've changed quite a bit. So I've obviously been starting horses for about 20 odd years, and I started with the single joints, Fulmer, and slightly fatter mouthpieces. They might have been single jointed, and Fulmers mostly with the young horses. So that's what I started with because that's what I used in Australia. And then I went to the double jointed. I still use Fulmers until one day I used Fulmers, but the way in my processes, horses, I leave bits in the horse's mouth just to let them mouth. So young horses, when you first put a bit in their mouth, they don't know what it is, and they're chewing. And you've probably seen horses when they've first had a bit in their mouth, they're chewing, they're trying to spit it out and trying to work out what it is, basically. So you just leave them to get used to it. You make sure it's not too tight and not too loose, but you let them sort of learn to play and pick it up and find a comfortable place in their mouth to just hold it. Anyway, I did that with a Fulmer, and you learn the hard way sometimes. And I have no idea what happened, but I came back. I just thought I'd put this horse in a stable, came back, and I found the Fulmer. Actually, it was a shorter Fulmer, and somehow this horse had rubbed it and knocked it or something, and it had twisted through its lip. And I just thought, right, that can't happen again. So I moved away from Fulmers particularly when I'm not there. I still ride in them from time to time, but I sort of moved across from them to D-rings because no edges, nothing to catch on anything. And they still offered that sort of ability to pull the side of the face and steer a little bit that way. So I've sort of moved to those in terms of the cheek pieces or bit rings. Then on to, in terms of progression, I might start my horses in a Fulmer or a D, and then move on to egg butts, which are a little bit more concentrated in the corner of the mouth, but still quite soft and quite a forgiving mouthpiece. And then depending on the horse and the rider, I move on to sort of loose rings, which offer a little bit more responsiveness and a little bit more feel. So yeah, and in terms of the mouthpieces I actually used with my starting and all that sort of thing, I've sort of gone to and from double jointed to thicker bits down to thinner bits. And how long is a piece of string? I'm getting horses that, who knows, I sort of have a bit of a look at the conformation of their mouth. But it's so hard to tell. You can see horses that have, really small mouths and stuff, but they'll take a big bit. And others have got big mouths, but they only want a thin bit or a straight bar, or, it's really a case of trial and error a little bit in the beginning. But I've gone now at this point in time, and this may change because I get horses come through the door that I go, oh, that's working really well for these 3 horses. Well, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to start with all those, and we're going to use those for all the horses. And then you'll see me a year later and think, oh, it's not going so well, so I'm going to adjust it again. So, but what I have learned is every horse is different, as my grandfather pointed out, and you've got to go with the flow. So I tend to start nowadays with a single jointed, thinner type snaffle. Then I sort of not too thin, but just I don't like too much metal in their mouths to start with. And then from there, I see how they accept contact, the tongue pressure that they get, and I adjust to a double jointed or a straight bar mouthpiece and see if they would prefer those as they go through the program. So that's sort of how that's how I sort of go through my program and sort of choose, from the start to finish, trying to find what works for horses. And sometimes, straight away. Other times, you want to get an expert like you, Gill, to come in and, just make sure, this is it, this is why, give it a little bit of time. And for me as a trainer, and talking to Gill, it's sort of, and it's a bit of a phrase that I always think about: is it bit or is it balance? So, horses when they're going along, especially when they're young, the horses I have, they're not really balanced, and you sort of turn them and they're falling, and of course everything looks a bit untidy. They open their mouths, or they get a bit shocked. Oh gosh, I've got to go that way, and suddenly they're, oh God, but again, there's extra pressure in the bit and they're not sure. And then they start to understand what you're doing. Everything starts to calm down, and they go along fine. And suddenly they settle on the bit and off they go. And then, so that's balance. And then there's other times where they're just not happy. And you think, well, I've shown you're going along fairly balanced, when I'm not actioning it too much. So maybe we need to try something different with the bit. So there is that to consider, which is why it can be quite a difficult, bitting generally, I'd imagine for you, Gill, can be quite challenging, because it's quite a multifaceted thing that you're looking at. You're looking at the rider, the horse's age, and ability, and then, and their temperament. I get horses that, they're just busy horses, and they're constantly mouthing, or they're constantly off balance, so it is quite a tricky thing to really get right. And it's being patient and every now and again swapping up or talking to an expert, like Gill. I would always recommend, and Gill pops down to see me whenever I sort of am scratching my head looking at a horse thing. I don't know. I feel like everything's all right. And it's amazing. I will say this, every now and again I've sort of had Jill down and she said a few things and I've gone, oh yeah. And so it makes perfect sense. Why did I not think of that? And yeah, and it's good. Yeah, every day's a learning day. So changing things and trying things, if it doesn't make a difference, well, again, you've learned something, and especially speaking to experts. So so yeah, that's a quick rundown of my sort of history and a little bit of what I do. So what I might do now, do you want me to see a video now, Jill, or do you want me to
I
just talk a
think so.
little bit about
Yeah.
processes?
I think what you've just said, it's right as well. Like you say, it's not, there's so many things to take into consideration with a horse and then the rider, because the riders are different too. So you're kind of pairing that as well. And if nothing else, I would say, to get peace of mind that you've got a bit, you can give signals. And again, like you said, there's going to be times as they improve, you change it up or change it down. I do find very often less gets more response. But again, like you said, it's an ever changing circle. If you've got horses that, there are going to be some that are a bit keener and a bit more willful, let's say, that you need, for want of a better word, you need to harness that and help them with their balance and set things. So there is room to change. But yeah, let's track on and see your video.
Okay. All right. So we have processes here with what we do. And I've got a video just about bridling, so I thought we'd start with that. And then I can maybe explain a little bit more of the mouthing process that we follow here and give you a bit of an idea of the sort of work that goes into it. But we can have a look at this first. Now, if your horse is ready to receive a bridle, you'll have done all your desensitizing. You'll be able to move your horse around and do all those sorts of things in your head collar. Now, once I'm at that stage and I can give my horse a rub, okay, and I've checked he's not too bothered about being touched around the head. So there's a lot of different ways to put bridles on. I'm going to show you how I do it. Now, to start off with, you'll notice I've still got my head collar on. That's just in case something goes a little bit wrong. I may be in a bigger area or anything like that. I can get my horse back under control by moving the hind end, stopping any flight, and then repeating. So the first thing I'll do before putting the bridle on is check the size. A lot of problems occur when people try and put bridles on that are too small. So to check the size of a bridle, so the best way to check whether your bridle is the right size is put it up to their lips and just check that it comes to the base of their ear. If you can see there, I've got that bridle right to the base of the ear. That means I'm going to have the gap from the front of my horse's muzzle to the corner of their mouth, that space to go over the ears, and that's a good guideline. So when we're putting the bridle on, I just wiggle my thumb into the corner of their mouth where the teeth aren't, and just move the bit a little bit until my horse opens the mouth. And I carefully, not to clunk on the teeth, slide it in, and there I've got a little bit of space to flick my ear through and round the other side. The smoother you can do this, the better. Remember, it's not about speed, it's about being smooth over and over. All right. Now, the conventional way of putting bridles on is to go up and underneath like that. Now, I'll show you why I don't do that. The bridle off, one ear at a time. Steadily let the bridle come out of the horse's mouth. Do not pull the bridle out of a horse's mouth. You'll clunk their teeth and they'll start to resent that. Okay, so I'm popping the bridle on. Now, as I bring the bridle up to my horse's ear, this guy's a little bit chewy, he wants things in his mouth. So as I bring the bridle up to my horse's ear, he is now thinking about his mouth. So as he's thinking about his mouth, I'm slipping the bridle over his ear. Now he's got his head up there looking at something. Here's another really good thing to have on your horse, to be able to say, down. So being able to
to drop your horse's head from pole pressure up here is also a really useful thing to have for bridling. And that's simply a matter of applying a little bit of pressure every time you get a downward movement from your horse, release. Very quickly, your horse will start to drop their head. And if you repeat that, particularly after bridling, say once the bridle's on, put your head down, pretty soon your horse is going to start to anticipate that cue afterwards. And then while you're putting the bridle on, they'll even start to drop their head. So there's a good little trick as well. So you can see with that method that when I'm putting the bit into the horse's mouth, I'm going over the ears at the same time. So they're distracted if they're a little bit worried about their ears being touched or going over their ears. You've got something else to think about. And again, which is a really good point, practice teaching your horse to open their mouth. So if you go back and think of the conventional method, when you're putting your bridle on, you deal with the mouth, you get the bit in there, and then you go for both ears at the same time. Now, for a horse that's slightly worried about their ears being handled, this becomes quite a focused point when you're putting the bridle on, and they can get a bit worried. Also, if I want my horse to put their head down from this position, it's very difficult because my arm is under there. All right, so that is why I put the bridle on the way I do. Now, there's one other point that I'd like to mention, which I didn't at the start, is before you put a bit in a horse's mouth, it's a really good idea to teach them to open their mouth. And that's a really simple process as well. Get them used to your touch around the muzzle. Leave your 4 fingers on the bridge of their nose there like so, and just sneak your thumb into their mouth. And just there, as soon as my horse chews on my thumb or moves their mouth, I simply take it away. And I can repeat that a couple of times until my horse understands. See, now he's wiggling there. Now he's moving his head around. That could be something that may happen when I'm putting the bridle on, which could cause a problem. So get them used to understanding that when the thumb goes into the mouth, it means open, okay? Or just play with your thumb, not throw the head around. See, he's thrown it, there it is, open mouth. Take it away. Now, in my program, I don't often use treats, but if a horse is willing to do something for me, then yes, I can. So if I'm having a little bit of trouble with my horse putting a bridle on, what I'll simply do is get my bridle into position, and you'll see here I've got a small little bit of feed in my hand, and I'll simply give them a little sniff. He knows now. And then as I slide the bridle in, I just let them have a little bit of a chew on something. That can also be a really good distraction and really sweeten up the idea of having a bit in their mouth.
Okay. How was that?
Yeah, great. Because also, I think it's like what you said earlier about training as well. It's good to whether it's a horse new to having a bit in, but even just taking that angst or giving that familiarity to a horse that you're actually just asking it to open its mouth. And one of the worst things for me is the horse, you get a really good result with the bit, and then unfortunately sometimes the owner kind of forgets himself and then whips the bridle off and it just clatters the teeth and it's like, no.
Yeah, you find out about that the next time you go to bridle your horse.
Yeah, yeah.
Not that again. So yeah, I mean, it just gives you some ideas about some of the prep work that I do, and putting a finger in a horse's mouth. If I've got a horse that's a little bit worried, I might be doing that for a couple of days to a week before I even, so they're really, they're just comfortable with it. It's also good for worming as well, just getting that little cue on your horse, just rubbing your horse over the eye. If they're really shy, I don't tend to go for the ears straight away. I just get them used to rubbing over the eye. It's quite a soothing motion as well. And then once I rub them over the eye, I'll just rub to the base of the ear and the eye. And then I might just rub a bit further past the ear. But they just get used to that touch, and you just gradually take away that sort of that distance between the eye and the ear, and they learn to settle. So yeah, I find that quite a good way to sort of get a horse ready to be bridled. In terms of the processes I use for actually mouthing horse, I've got another video. I think that might be on a similar. I don't know whether it might be worth looking at that now. It's quite a short one, Jill.
Yeah,
We could
you
look
go
at
for
that.
it. Yeah.
It's Hamish doing it, but I think he's working with a trickier horse to bridle.
Yeah.
So it might be a good sort of way, we'll see what he says. Hopefully it's similar to what I've said. I think this horse needs a little bit more preparation. So okay, let's see if it's a little bit the same. Okay, and this will be sort of bridling done. We can talk about that in a second, and then we'll talk about the processes to get them bitted up, ready to ride and carry on from there. Okay. Let's have a look. Can you all see that?
Yeah.
Okay, let's see what Hamish has got to say.
Because when we come under the chin, you can see he's already doing it now. The horse's way out is up the top. I notice how I'm pushing the ears forwards. And I also want to be able to use the head collar to begin with to help me teach a head down cue. This is very simple. It's just a little bit of pressure on the top of the pole gets the head to drop. This can eventually grow from being the head collar to being your hand, a little bit of pressure, and then down comes the head. Now I can have my hand on top of his head. Now he knows his head down cue, so there's a little bit of pressure there, but he knows to keep his head just in that spot. See, as the head went up, because I have my hand here, he recognized, oh, that means I've got to come down. As you said, there's a bit of a trick with these head collars. And you can use, undo the head collar, and you slip the nose band over the top of the nose, into the mouth, and it goes over the top of the bit, under the bit, and out again.
Okay. That was a very quick one, but it had some tips there. So for anyone that uses a rope head collar, or what we're using now more and more are the hybrid head collars, you can, if you've got a tricky horse to bridle, which sometimes we do, then you can leave the head collar on underneath. And I will say that's why you might have noticed the bridles that we use. So in the very beginning, we tend to use stock bridles, or we use the Quantum bridles, but we don't have the coversons on them, the nose bands, because it's just something else that can get in the way and could create a little bit of a moment where your horse flows their head and goes, oh, that's an idea. So we have open bridles, so they're really easy to put on until your horse becomes familiar with bridling. And then we start to put nose bands on and get the horse into its sort of more competition gear, or whatever might suit that horse at the time. So, and there's obviously some of the tips that you heard. And you saw the head down cue that I spoke about in my video, how it can be done, by placing your hand on top of the horse's head. And again, takes a bit of practice, a little bit of time, but it really is well worth it, especially when you turn up to a show and your horse basically opens its mouth and drops its head. I mean, it's just like, wow, that's pretty impressive. So yeah, a couple of really good tips for bridling. And take off all the, when you're with your bridle, take off all the bits that you can and keep it simple in the beginning, and you'll find it's a much easier process. In terms of getting horses, I mean, do you want to talk more about bridles, Jill?
Well, I just wanted to say that actually I've taken that away from you as well. I've actually adopted a bit of that where possible, because those who have met me know that I'm a bit vertically challenged, so I can't be chasing horses all up and around. So yeah, I'm quite where possible. It's not always possible, but I wait for them to come down, so it's a lot less stressful, and I'll be talking to the client, not really, I am doing something with the horse, but really just guiding the horse down. So it doesn't make me look so stupid, to be honest. So the horse will take the bit a bit more readily. Having said that, obviously not all. I then ask the owners who are taller to do
Yeah.
it. But
Well, and it's important to note it takes time. You can't just walk into a horse and just go head down, put the bridle on.
no,
You've got to teach the horse, and that's time. So when you're going in to do a job, you can use these processes, but it doesn't. It's better that the owners have got these things on their horses, which is why a webinar like this is great, because
yeah.
hopefully they can prep the horse for you so you can do what you need to do instead of being flung around all over the place.
It's one of those things that actually, it should be part, definitely part of the early onset process. You know, like you do the mounting, that they've got to stand there and be respectful. But I think for the horse, it just makes everything a lot smoother and a lot simpler to get on with the next part of their training, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Little increments of training, which is great if they can come to someone like you and kind of get that hands-on experience. But
I'm,
yeah.
yeah. I'm all about making it simpler and easier. I'm still trying to find ways to make it, it's funny, I think the process that I have is great. And the reason I've called Your Horsemanship, my business, what I've called it is because I think it's always evolving and you're always looking for things that are going to be better for your horse, easier for you, or if you're lucky, both. And just and you're trying to just make it a better experience, And I just find if it's easy, generally it's done with a process and you've broken it down into little chunks that don't take much. So, with that in mind, the process I use, once they're bridle and they're used to a bit, stood around chewing some hay with a bit in their mouth or just tied up with a bit until they start enjoying the scenery, then I'll teach them, and I always do this in a head collar first. I always teach them to bend, flex left and right. And, when I flex to the left, I see that when they're off to the left and they're a little bit more, their muscles are more susceptible, then I'll look for a little bit of a vertical flexion as well. So they know that there's a place here for them rather than sort of always being tense and looking up like this. They can let go to that pressure or that feel. So I'll do a lot of that and I'll move them around with the head collar. And then I'll do the exact same with the bit. So I'll start to bend them and move them around with so in a leading type fashion, but more what I call it leading lunging. So I'm close enough to the horse that I'm leading. I could be leading them, but I'm in a lunging position, so I can push my horse, and they get to feel a bit of contact as they move around me, and start to understand what that means, and then go back to flexions and give them an idea of the bit and what it actually means, left, right, and if I action both bits or both reins at the same time, I'd be looking just for a step back, and I will have done the same with the head collar on the nose, and I'll spend a few days just getting them used to that. And there is a couple of things. There is something that's really important about the pressure you use. Horses have to get used to a constant pressure, so I call it or a following pressure. So if you apply a gentle, steady pressure, you want them to follow that or feel that and just follow that pressure around. They also need to get used to a bumping pressure, and that's for times when we get a little bit off balance, and they're used to the idea if they get bumped, then it still means the same thing. So I'll get a horse I might bump the horse. When they first feel a bump, they'll probably want to do this. And I don't bump them any harder. I put a bump on them. So if I've got a rein and to the bit, I'll just bump and they'll go, oh my gosh, what's happening? And then I'll wait till I see a little action or a little give back towards where I'm bumping them to, and then I'll relax. So when they feel a bump, and it does make them quite soft as well. When you pick the bit up, oh, you're going to bump me, I've got to come this way. And then I'll work on some constant pressures as well. But it's good, when if a bit is a bit sort of touches them like this, you don't want that to be startle them. You want them to go, yeah, that is a bit of a sudden movement, but find it, follow it. So getting used to constant and bumping pressures, I find good in the beginning, and they tend to be much more tolerant, I've found, of the bit and sudden movements or things like that. So once my horse is used to that, then I'll actually put them in side reins. So I find this a really good way to just get them comfortable with bit pressure as well. So, but I need them to understand where their out is. If you haven't taught a horse that up here is not the place to be, then when a horse gets worried, that's instantly what they'll do. And if they don't know any different, if you haven't taught them there's an out or there's a way to alleviate that feeling down here, then they'll put their head up. And obviously, if they're fixed, then they're stuck and they can panic. So there is definitely a process to getting your horse used to this. So once I've got them and done the left side, the right side, they can step backwards, go forwards. Then I'll put the side reins on and they'll push against it and find that place, push against. They push down, they'll lift up and just get there, and they'll go from side to side until they realize, okay, if I go too far this way, it pulls me back here. If I go too far this way, it pulls me back there. Now, when I put side reins on, I do not put them in so that the horse is on the vertical. That's not what I do. That's not why I do it. I do it so the horse can start to understand where to put their head if they feel bit pressure. So I always set the side reins at this stage sort of in front of the vertical, so where they're comfortable to keep their head. So to make contact, they actually have to go looking for it. So when they want to stretch or turn their head or something like that, they'll feel the contact. And then there's a big space in the middle where there's no contact. If you do it too tight, too early, you can, with some horses, you can find yourself or them panicking. And it doesn't teach them to move left and right. It teaches them to fix. And I want it loose enough that they can feel that, come back here. And so that for me is a really important process, and allowing them to just settle and relax to it. And when I'm
Sorry,
doing,
Jason. Could I just interject on that? And that's something I want to pick up on that I see a lot. That I most commonly I'm trying to get horses to come out and stretch to the bit with it ear. It most of them are up and behind or sucked into their shirt collars, as I determine it, which biomechanically it affects a lot of things. They can't come through from the hind leg or lift the core. So to get again to on those early days or as soon as you can get them to go out to a bit will save you lots of evasion points later on. And when you said then they can't flex so easily, they get a bit stuck, that definitely causes a lot of issues that I see. So you're trying to undo that, with bitting. So just wanted to touch on that point a little bit.
yeah, no, it's so true. I see it a lot. People overusing side reins, particularly when they're too short. I think when they're slightly longer and you're trying to get a horse forward to stretch out a little bit, I don't think you can do too much of that. But if you've got them pinned in and they're really too straight and they've got no room to move, I think that I like to be able to, I like to have bend in my horses because it's how I control flight. And so if they're too set and too rigid and they find it, you ask them to go to the left or to the right and they go, well, I don't do that. I'm fixed here. So you instantly get resistance. And then I find it much more difficult to control flight. So yeah, I find that quite an important thing. And when I'm from there, then I start doing my one rein work. So I teach my horse to turn using one rein. So turn a small circle. And I just have, and by this time I'll have a roller on. So I'll attach uh, a long line through the roller to the bit, and then I'll do what I call a one rein stop. So I'll move them on, and they know how to bend. They know what the bit means now, and I'll just, as I move them on, I'll just pull on the side of the rein, that one rein, and that they'll feel the pressure. They'll find it a little bit difficult because they're moving now, but they know that there's a place here when they bend their head to alleviate the pressure. And of course, when they bend their head, it's much harder to go forward, and eventually they'll stop. And so I repeat that a few times till they learn to bend their head and stop. And I do that on both reins. So I get this one rein sort of stop, and then I'll teach them to go forward into that turn. So there's, again, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but I'll put them in that bend once they've learned to stop, and then I'll actually ask them to move, but I'll keep their head bent until they take a couple of steps before I let them out. So they do a small circle and come out, and that's teaching them that they can go forward into it as well as stop from it. So everything I do in the beginning is on one side of the horse, left side, then the right side, and it's stop and go from the bend before I do anything else. And then once they're good at that, I'll do a similar thing, except I'll put two lines on them, and I'll start to long line them around. And most of everything I do is left and right, and there's a way with the lunging process that I teach them to stop and then move the back end to start getting a little bit of a step back. And you want, to start a horse using the bit, you got to teach them left, right, forwards, and backwards. And they need to be good at all those four things in the beginning. And then they have options. And what I'm trying to do is give my horse options all the time. So yeah, and then we build from there into the two reins, and then on to the ridden work. And of course, if you've got the right bit, as I say to Gill, which is why I agreed to come on here and have a chat with Gill, is if you've got the right bit, it makes this whole process so much easier. So there we are. That's it in a bit of a nutshell.
That's amazing. Thank you. I think, again, it kind of reiterates that it's not all just about having the bit, that it is a communication tool. And if that horse can't process that for any reason, wrong shape, wrong cheek pieces, etc., then you hit a stumbling block, don't you? So, there will be a bit that you can get the communication with. It just might mean for various different facial conformations, etc., age, experience, it might vary. But and as too with the bridle, as we said, you start with your stock bridle, but you quite like the quantum bridle for the softness of more progressional work, probably. And we talked briefly about sort of nose bands, and that yes, they can be used as a little bit of a boundary if you've got a horse that's habitually open in its mouth, which you need to kind of just dissolve that little issue. But definitely my least favourite, as people will know, is the flash nose band, because there's too much temptation to do that little strap up a bit tight when the bit is perhaps the wrong choice. So it's a sticking plaster rather than a working through in solution type thing. But yeah, it's it's good that everybody kind of, once you get people that all sing off the same hymn sheet, it's nice to have people like you can go to. I've definitely picked up a load of things from you and understood more, and hopefully with the bitting as well, we've kind of had a little chat now and again about different types of things. And like you say, you get that, like, this really works, but then something else comes, and again, bitting's evolving, the different weight of the bits. I use now a lot of titanium bits that lock or don't have a collapse, but then you get the ones that do have that collapse, they give a little bit of a squeeze sometimes to lighten them up, and then the myriad of cheek pieces. But I think on the whole, you just want your horses to be comfortable and responsive, don't you?
Yeah. Well, for me, I think it just comes back to knowledge is power, Jill. And I think, for you, you're someone that is really, you've taken a keen interest in this. You're very good at it. And, you know, things are changing outside of, the normal person's knowledge. And for you to come in and sort of, I've been to some of your clinics and stuff, and they're brilliant because you look inside a horse's mouth and you get a bit of an understanding of how the bit sits, conformation, and I just think it makes such a difference to to getting that sort of knowledge to helping your horse be more comfortable. And what we're all looking for is a comfortable, easy horse. And these things matter. And knowledge is power. And
I was going to say,
obviously,
you never stop learning, do you? So, no matter how good you are at things, you can always take a little bit of something from everybody. And, that's only a good thing, isn't it, if you're passionate about it?
well, exactly. Every day's a learning day.
Oh, yeah. Well, thank you so much for giving your time up, Jason. It was lovely. And we will be putting the recording out, and also, sending you back to your horsemanship. We've got lots of camps and courses and things. So we'll make sure you know all about that. But thanks ever so much, Jason.
No, it's a pleasure. Are you coming down to ours this year? Are you going to do a
Yeah,
clinic?
yeah, we've got several things running down at yours. We've got some view, watch, and listen days. We've got some more courses. We've got the professionals course, which is for saddlers, equine dentists, etc. Just an insight and some practical days. And then we've got the big consultancy course for any of those that want to become bitting consultants. So yeah, we've got lots happening down at yours. It's a great venue. I love it. So we'll be there.
Perfect. And anyone who's interested in clinics and courses and things like that, we do a fair few of those. And they're pretty full at the moment, but definitely have a look at those if you're interested. Anyway, Jill, really nice to see you. Good to see you all. I hope you got something from it, and hopefully see you around.
Yeah, thanks for joining, everyone. Take care.
All right, bye.
Bye bye.